pages at a time. So I'm going to hope when I turn a page, there'll be less commotion. Okay. So there's a great deal to celebrate tonight with a merger, and I love this opportunity to describe why I think it's a great time to celebrate. So first, the creation of the Centennial Fund is a perfect example of what residents can do when they get together and they have a great idea. Some of you already know the story, and for those of you who don't, I'd love to be able to tell you, but 30 years ago, the library had an author's reception to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the library. 90 authors were invited, and their books were on display. So when residents came, they could look at the books of all the authors. So Brooks Fenno, who's a marketing consultant, and he's here tonight. Maybe, Brooks, you could put your hand up. Thank you. He looked through the display, and much to his dismay, his book wasn't there. And he had just written it. It was called Helping Your Business Grow. In fact, it's right behind Janet Patillo, so town acquired it at some time. So Brooks went right to the head librarian and said, well, how come my book isn't in the display and out on the counter? And she explained that Proposition 2.5 had just been enacted, and there had been budget cuts across the town, and there were cuts in the library budget, and that was the culprit, the reason why his book wasn't on display. So I think he went around moping for the rest of the evening, and then came up with a great idea. He thought that there ought to be a fundraising effort for the library, and that a group of citizens should get together and raise funds for a materials collection, which would, at that time, then include his own book. So by the end of the evening, he had hatched his plan. He had talked to the head librarian about it, and then by the end of the evening, he had corralled some people to be on his committee. He had John Wilkins, he had Mary Ann Kluggish, Betsy Powell, who's here tonight, me, and Larry Benzie. And he didn't know any of us. And he certainly didn't know Mary Ann Kluggish. So we then had our first meeting, and the timid ones of the group said, well, we'll raise, how about $50,000? That seemed like a big amount. And Mary Ann said, are you kidding? $50,000? We need to raise $500,000. Well, none of us had ever done any fundraising. It was an astronomical number, and we agreed. We could only say yes to Mary Ann. So off the group went, got other people to help, and eventually we reached the goal of $500,000. But it is a great example of a good idea and residents coming together around it to make it happen. So the second big item to celebrate, I think, tonight is a second aspect, which is the concept behind the creation of the fund itself. An endowment fund was created whose purpose was to enhance and enrich the books and materials collection of the library. Because of the constraints of 2.5 that had forced the budget cuts throughout the town, we wanted to ensure that the Centennial Fund endowment would be used only to enhance and enrich, rather than to substitute for taxpayer funds. Peg Metzger, our current town moderator, was then a library trustee and a very young lawyer. The legal document setting up the fund, thanks to her careful craftsmanship and editing, have become a model for use by libraries in other communities. And the third reason to celebrate tonight is perhaps the most enduring impact of the Centennial Fund. It established the very important principle that private philanthropy is appropriate and can be used to support public institutions. The most difficult challenge in the early years of our fundraising was to overcome the general view that a public institution should be supported solely by taxpayer funds, that private philanthropy was inappropriate in a public setting. Now, of course, public-private partnerships have been fully accepted in our town. We just need to look at the Wellesley Education Foundation and the Wellesley Free Library Foundation itself. The Centennial Fund trustees, both present and former, are very proud of this legacy. Fourth, and finally, the Centennial Fund has served as a vehicle to receive bequests and to pay tribute to others. There are several funds that come under the general umbrella of the Centennial Fund and have been set up for specific purposes. We have the Marriott Fund for music materials, which resulted from bequests from two Wellesley residents who lived on White Oak Road, Stephanie and Franklin Marriott. There's the Ann Reynolds Fund for staff development, which was set up on the retirement of Janice Kadori's predecessor. It's used for, and then there's the Robert Hinchcliffe Fund for military materials, created to honor Bob Hinchcliffe for his 10 years of very careful and thorough services as trustee to the Centennial Fund. And we're very sorry that he can't be here tonight, because the Centennial Fund was something that was near and dear to his heart. Then there's the John Wilkins Fund for business materials that was set up in gratitude for John, who's a founding trustee, for his services over a period of 25 years as a trustee, and for the inestimable gift as the investment counselor for managing this endowment fund without ever taking a fee. We watched with delight and much appreciation as the fund now tops $3.8 million. This ability to set up separate funds and manage them as part of the overall endowment should be very important to the Library Foundation in the future in seeking bequests and in setting up specifically targeted funds. So in fact, just before the court approved the merger in the spring, the Centennial Fund trustees took advantage of the ability to and set up a fund to honor Rusty Kellogg for his exemplary contribution to the Centennial Fund and to the town. Rusty was a Centennial Fund trustee for 25 years and its treasurer for 10. The success of this merger we are celebrating tonight is due in part to his moderate, reasoned advice. And of course, he has a shining record for his town service. He's been a town meeting member for almost 30 years, and he served on numerous committees, and in most instances also chaired them. The Housing Development Corporation, the Advisory Committee, the Audit Committee, the now defunct Capital and Budgeting and Investment Committee, and the High School Building Committee. The successful vote by town meeting to appropriate $130 million for the high school was due in good part to Rusty's thoughtful, measured work in his capacity as the then chair of the advisory committee. His advice is constantly sought on town issues, and his opinions influence many critical town issues. So there was a short window of opportunity for the Centennial Fund trustees to raise funds. We had 3 months, and we met our goal of around $230,000. And we thank many of you who are here who made contributions to it. The purpose of the Kellogg Fund is to provide a source of perpetual funding for the Library Foundation to enhance and to enrich the equipment, the technology, services, programs, materials, and collections. It is a great, broad purpose which will allow the foundation trustees to make significant financial and strategic contributions to the library. It seemed to us, the Centennial Fund trustees, to be a fitting last act in setting up the fund, as it underscores our confidence and hope in the Library Foundation and what it may accomplish in the future. So thank you very much.